session today is on law firm management and how to get more value and demonstrate the commercial value, commercial benefit. We've got three fantastic speakers today, so I'm delighted to welcome Will Long. Will, give us a wave. So Will is Client Partnership Director at Alacrity, the law firm relationship management platform. Will's got fantastic experience. He's spent the last 15 years helping in-house functions work in a smarter way. And he really focuses on helping businesses build better relationships with their external clients. We've got Maria. Maria, give us a wave. Morning. Maria is a director at Radius Law and has been part of these general counsel sessions since the start. Radius Law is a really interesting law firm, challenging itself all the time to innovate how legal services are delivered. And Maria specialises with a broad range of commercial focus. And then last but not least, we have Toby from Snowfall. Toby's giving us a wave now. Toby is general counsel at Snowfall Travel. He started out as a structured finance lawyer at A&O. He's worked at BAE Systems, where he worked, sounds really cool, augmented reality and spy equipment, which really tickled my fancy. And Snowfall is a VC-backed international tech scale-up, and Toby has been tasked with building up the legal team as the business goes through a period of extreme growth, even despite COVID. So that's good for everyone at Snowfall. And then we have Emma, who I can't see now on my screen. Oh, there we go, top right. Hi, Emma. Emma is going to chair the panel session, and Emma is head of in-house strategy at LexisNexis, which is a leading practical guidance platform for lawyers. So thank you very much, and over to Emma.
Thanks, Sophie, and welcome everybody. So we're going to kick off the session with our first poll of the day, I believe. So Sasha, if you would be able to share that poll question. What type of AFA or alternative fee arrangements does your legal department use with law firms? And thank you to those of you that have started replying. Okay, so just whilst the last few people post their results, we can see the resounding leader is the fixed fee. Oh, cap fees are coming back. So fixed fees 77%, cap fees 62%, blended 31%, success or outcome based fees 19%, and none of the above is 11%. Okay, and we're going to move on now to the panel discussion with Toby, Will and Maria. We've got three key sections that we want to cover off today, and we are time restricted. So I'm going to try and do my best to keep each section to about 10 minutes. So Will, Toby and Maria, I will shepherd's crook you off if you talk for too long. I would be grateful if you could keep your answers as concise as possible. And obviously, please feel free to interject as required on other people's comments. So we're going to start off today by thinking about cost control and how this can impact the services that you're provided with. And Will, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first. And you work with lots of legal teams in your role. Could you give us some insight into the different cost control measures that you're seeing being used at the moment? And also, if you've got any insight or thoughts about changes in the type of fee structures legal teams are looking for, and changes that perhaps law firms are offering out to legal teams. Any thoughts?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So that was really interesting. I think that poll kind of mirrored what I'm seeing at the moment in the market, which is definitely, a move to these alternative fee structures. I think, though, that what's driving it at the moment is obviously businesses have been coping with a lot of uncertainty and change over the last year or so. General counsel tend to be even more time poor as well than they were before. And so predictability and cost certainty become the order of the day. And I think fundamentally that's what's driving, in my experience anyway, this preference for fixed or capped fees so that we know what we're going to get at the end of the day. I think that what I also see, though, and it would be interesting to listen to what Maria and Toby have to say about this, is that particularly fixed fees, it comes down a lot to how precisely we can scope a matter. And what we often find is that law firms will agree to fixed fees, but building in, a number of caveats and guardrails around the way that they've structured that fixed fee, so many assumptions that can be blown that ultimately it doesn't really deliver the predictability and cost certainty that we really want. And I think that's a really interesting piece, because I think, you know, obviously these alternative fee structures are fantastic, but really it's code for wanting greater predictability and cost certainty. Is there a better way to deliver that? Is it more about agreeing a fair price up front and making sure that communication is as effective as possible while matters are live and ongoing, so that we can address any surprises as they come up and still not get an invoice that's 3 times as big as we thought it was going to be at the end of the day. I think on the sort of corollary, some of the tools that are out there at the moment actually don't really help save that much time, because if your approach is to look at that invoice and to start stripping out line items and start having an argument with your firms around, you know, what you're prepared to pay for, that sort of adversarial to and fro, that's actually quite a time sink for a lot of the people I'm talking to. Obviously law firms don't like it either because they don't get paid on time. And I think that, you know, that approach is something that clients are starting to move away from as well, in favor of trying to just understand what a fair price is and can we stick to that.
Brilliant, thank you. Toby or Maria, do you have any comments on Will's points?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot there, Will. I think for me, the horrible, for any person buying legal services, the horrible thing, well, as you say, you want certainty and you know, predictability in your costs, because particularly for a business like ours, which is in a growth phase where every penny counts, but we haven't got a huge, you know, we have a big legal spend, but we don't have lots of money sloshing around just to dispense, right, if things go over. And so, and obviously I have to report back if that happens, and that puts, you know, people in difficult positions, right? And it's really unhelpful. And I think transparency, predictability, and I think transparency is absolutely key on where costs are going. It's just hugely helpful, because it's, you know, I can't see why any, you know, law firm wouldn't want to put their, you know, client, whether it's general counsel or anyone that's buying legal services, in a position where they can, you know, be best armed to go back in internally and get that spend approved for next time, or to that, you know, to increase that that initial budget, whatever it might be. So I think predictability, yes, but transparency is almost perhaps more important for me, and that means kind of constant, you know, conversations about costs and where they're going, and, you know, whether you use tools or not. I mean, just a good old-fashioned conversation is pretty helpful, rather than being slapped with a bill at the end that you weren't expecting. Super important.
Yeah. Maria, I was just going to ask if you had anything to add.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've sort of spent a bit of time at Radius thinking about what that transparency can look like and that predictability. And so a lot of what we've done is think about, well, we just publish our fees on a website, and so they're out for everybody to see, and there is that certainty of these are our costs. And yes, we offer different ideas about how we can structure those, but then I think the predictability comes, or that cost management comes, through a slightly different approach, where you don't invoice just at the end of a matter, and it can vary a lot depending on the volume of that project, you know, what that overall spend is. But actually having that regular check-in, whereby we just take the approach to bill our WIP on a monthly basis, and therefore the money is ticking in, which is important for us from a business cash flow point of view. But actually the more important thing is it starts a conversation to check in with the client. Hey, look, we have set this fixed fee, we've set this scope, this is how we're tracking to it, both from a timescale point of view in terms of delivering in the right time, but also, are we approaching overspend, or were those service requirements that you asked us to do this month slightly different, and do we need to think about that and adjusting? So our approach is very much to not generate a surprise at the end of the project, but it's just one way. I think there's also another thought to point about the importance of scope. I mean, I'm sure all of our businesses, and my constant challenge when I was actually a GC was that my business were terrible at scoping. They were terrible at scoping their own services. So there's a sort of strong argument to say, sitting now on the law firm side of the situation, to say, actually, we need to really think about the scope as a client, as a GC. What is it you actually want the law firm to do, and be very prescriptive in that, and give that information so that the fee that they propose can be fair, because often those guardrails are because there are so many unknowns. We could go down this path, we're not too sure what will happen here. And I think that that's where the huge margins can be built into law firm fixed fees, and therefore that's not a fair price either. You're not getting to hint at the next conversation value.
Okay. And so, Maria, again, thinking about the fact you've sat on both sides of the fence, so to speak, other than the ones you've already mentioned, are there any other particular areas of tension that you've experienced between legal teams and external counsel around service provision? anything for people to be looking out for or prepared for?
I guess that there is one point that is, maybe it's not attention because I don't know whether it's actually raised, and it might come to later on in the conversation, but there is always that risk that you ask a law firm to do the work, you're not very happy with their output, you reluctantly pay the invoice, but you actually make a mental note to yourself to say, well, actually wasn't really what I wanted. Either it was too academic, it wasn't practical, there's no feedback loop, there's no discussion loop. And often a law firm's the same, they're probably sitting on that side of the fence. And certainly I've reflected a little bit on a couple of pieces of work I've done, thought that wasn't really what I was wanting as an output, and the client's not coming back to me and saying, yeah, that was great, why is that? And I think we shy away from that conversation. So from a point of transparency and that kind of service tension, I think we need to stop thinking of ourselves as two different providers and two extended service delivery. You know, we are together as the general counsel or the legal team and the external provider.
I mean, I see, yeah, that's exactly it. We see our firms as partners, right? And it's when you first have that conversation with the firm that you're looking to instruct, I always start the conversation by talking about partnerships, right? Rather than a kind of purchase of a service in a way, which changes the nature of the conversation, or should do straight off the bat. But that feedback point's really interesting because lawyers hate feedback, right? Whether you're in-house or private practitioner or whatever, everyone hates feedback, or at least asking for it, because you know we always want to be absolutely right in everything we do, but we don't like being told we're not. But the feedback for me should be more informal. We, the concept of a relationship meeting every year or every 6 months or whatever it might be is great, but actually that's not where a lot of the real feedback comes. It's on deal perhaps, or during a transaction, and that kind of informal conversation. If you're not happy, or if you are happy, right, even better, if you're happy, tell them, right? That's one of the great things that we should be doing, which is a good way to then offset that horrible conversation that might come at the end, as you said, Maria, where you're not wildly happy with the service, or conversely, the firm isn't happy with the level of information they were provided, and that's why the fees busted and that sort of thing. So feedback and regular feedback is super important.
I think that's right. It's surprising in a sense, isn't it, that if we're working in partnership with our law firms, that there's a hesitance to receive or give feedback, because really that's part of how teamwork works, right? And we all know this in our daily lives. I think the interesting thing about feedback for me is that today, most of it is on a one-to-one basis. So the instructing lawyer, the in-house lawyer who's running that project might give feedback to the relationship partner. Or occasionally on a periodic basis, as you said, Toby, the GC will sit down with the relationship firm over a nice bottle of wine and we'll have a conversation around, how well things are working. The point is that feedback piece isn't normally captured in a very systemic way. It's very subjective. It's often lost or passed around by word of mouth. For larger organizations, we find it's very difficult to know how well a firm is performing in one jurisdiction versus another. And so it becomes so confusing and sort of hard to nail down this feedback piece, that it's kind of easier just to go with, our gut instinct on some of these things. What we're trying to do is bring a lot more objective data to that. So, almost making it more comfortable by being able to say, objectively, this is how you stack up against your peers. Let's talk about how you can raise your game or what we can do differently. So absolutely, that feedback loop has to operate in both directions. So if it's around scoping, for example, let's help clients understand by having law firms give feedback on scope on every matter. Why not?
Sounds really sensible when you say it like that, Will, but often it's not that easy in practice, is it? And actually, some of those points will feed into a couple of the areas we're going to be discussing later. So I think we'll stop that one now and jump straight into our second poll. So the question is, how satisfied are you with the transparency and communication around costs from your law firm? Oh, jump straight in, 50-50 to satisfied and not satisfied. Right, okay, so we're just under the 30 mark and it's relatively even. 50% of you are satisfied, and on the flip, 43% of you are not satisfied, and there's only a handful that are very satisfied. So some interesting split there. We're going to go on to the second section of the panel discussion, which is around the concept of value. And as we all know, the challenges of the last year have really highlighted even more the need to demonstrate value, whether that's the legal team demonstrating value back to the business, or law firms demonstrating value to their legal teams that they work with. But what actually is value? and what are some of the different ways value can be demonstrated or provided by a law firm? And Toby, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first on this point. From your perspective, what does value mean to you?
I think obviously it's super, totally subjective, right? To each individual person, then to each business. I think it's assumed. I think it must be assumed by probably everyone on the call, when you go out to your usual law firms or to new potential law firms, you're going to get, or at least you're going to be told you're going to get, top advice, timely advice, etc. And that's kind of a given, and it's pretty staid. The creds that you get back are always going to be impressive, right? That's kind of, certainly for the top 100 firms, that's kind of the idea. But value, I think it goes so much, certainly in the last year or 18 months, for in a business like ours, which is focused on travel, right, which has been absolutely decimated. We've been okay, but it really helped us. And what really helped us was to feel like we were in that partnership, that sort of teamwork mode again with our firms, where actually they were proactive, reached out to us, and were actually thinking about our business, before perhaps we were even thinking about the issues ourselves, because we were too busy dealing with the fallout from what was going on. So that's been, it's not necessarily easy to metricate, but that was really helpful. And a couple of our firms were brilliant at that, and just got in touch straight away and said, look, we're here to help. How can we help you? For me, the value, it's more than, as I say, legal service. It's what else comes with it. And it's more about aligning our values as a business, perhaps, to the values of the firms that we use. So we're a purpose-led organization, like probably lots of companies, companies on the call. And so for us, trying to find firms and other service providers that share the values, or at least, not just say they share the values, but then demonstrate that they can share those values in the way they work and the way they deliver service is super important to us. It's one of our criteria for bringing on new firms. We don't have many, but when we do, we look at that really closely. So, in terms of provision for, support to staff, mental health, the way they deliver services is as important probably now for us as the sort of actual advice we get, because we assume it's going to be the best anyway.
Brilliant, thank you. And Maria, just picking up on that from your side, how do you, or how from your experience, have you seen law firms responding to that often intangible concept of value, and how they approach being seen to deliver it to their clients?
Yeah, absolutely. And to Toby's point about it, it's kind of a given that you provide good, accurate legal advice, but there's also a sort of extension to that in terms of the type of advice you're wanting, and I think that's quite important as well. So quite often you'll find a law firm will deliver just an academic response, so chapter and verse about the law in that field or that area, and then come to a close. Now, as a client, that might be exactly what you want, and I do have a couple of clients who want that very objective, very independent opinion, so that they can internally decide and decipher how that applies to their business. And some of that goes to how much of a partnership angle they want. They want that independence of an external advisor to give that. But then in the converse, actually, I see value as being delivering more than that. And so delivering that application so that the GC, and I had that a few times when I was in-house, I would have to overlay the practical application to the business in terms of what the legal advice was and how we could apply it, or what our options were. And so extrapolate beyond the legal advice as a given being correct to something more. And I think that's an important value add that law firms should do, should the client want it. Now, you can't, like Toby says, it's very subjective. Some may want it, some may not. I did have another thought about what value could be, and it's about a little bit, and Miranda's pointed in the chat there about you don't always know as a GC what you're scoping or how you're scoping. And so something that I learned actually as a trainee far too long ago was a very good value add as a law firm is to invest the time to sit on team meetings. So sit alongside your legal team that you're working for and just absorb the issues of the day, absorb what they're feeling, what their attitude is to certain types of risk. And you start to become the natural extension or the partner to them. That then helps in two ways. One, it's much easier for the GC to instruct you because you don't necessarily need to scope. You've got more of an idea of what the issue is and therefore can offer a fair price. But secondly, you can also filter exactly what the advice response is that you need to give. So it's kind of one of my tips in terms of that value add. And it may be something as sort of general counsels out there who are on the call might think about in terms of how you embrace your external counsel to come in and to get that value add by just being there and inadvertently you'll obviously get a fair amount of free advice because they're sitting there talking to you, and you might just accidentally get the 10-minute answer that you didn't have to pay an hour's fee for.
That's great, a great tip. And Will, are you seeing any particular trends around value at the moment? In particular, have you got any learnings you can share for what's been going on over the last year about client expectations around value? Have they changed at all?
Yeah, just incidentally, it just struck me, I know that LexisNexis did some marvelous research on that point around gold-plated advice against, business-focused advice from law firms, that it might be helpful to share. It was on the trust and transparency piece. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of what we're seeing at the moment, look, everyone's under cost pressure again. And the temptation then is to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to value, I think. So, those of us who can remember the great crisis in 2008, there was a lot of fanfare after that around, magic tools that were going to cut invoices in half, huge discounted rate cards that had been agreed across panels, those sorts of things. But what happened next was that law firm profitability skyrocketed, and a lot of GCs felt they weren't getting the quality of service or the outcomes, as we were talking about earlier, that they wanted. Never mind, to Toby's point, feeling that their firms were really aligned in a genuine way to their corporate values when it comes to things like diversity in particular. So a lot of businesses are coming to us at the moment to help show them, which law firms are actually making progress when it comes to diversity, for instance. And we can talk to them about how work is being staffed, but I think there's a huge appetite to go a step further and think about, promotion, tenure, attrition rates when it comes to diverse talent as well. So I think that while that cost pressure is there and the temptation is to go for the sort of cheapest, I do think there's a broad understanding out there that value means a huge amount more than that, and that there's a sort of concurrent pressure to deliver on those other aspects as well, and definitely value-added services is a big piece of that as well. Something else where, dare I say it, lip service has been paid in some panel arrangements, but you never really know who's delivering what. Something else that can be tracked and quantified, and that I think businesses are increasingly wanting to do that.
That's brilliant, and we're going to go on to talk about information in a minute. And Toby, did you just have a point you wanted to?
Yeah, Maria's example of joining, having a law firm embedded in the way that you described, Maria, is great, because you won't find a credential pack that doesn't talk about how the firm understands the business, of the client, and they have a deep understanding of the market and a deep understanding of this and that and the other. But actually, all too often we do get, and this is not meant to bash law firms because most of them are fantastic, but you do quite often get that sort of blanket advice or that sort of off-the-shelf memo that you didn't really need, because you then got to go and do the work again internally, or one of your team has to go and put it in a presentable format, whatever it might be. That's really interesting. I don't know how many, how common that would be, that sort of solution, but it's an interesting one.
It certainly is. And sorry, was somebody just going to make a comment there?
It was me. I was just going to sort of reinforce the point with Toby that certainly I've offered it and it's been well received from a number of clients, but other clients are a little bit hesitant in that sense of, well, actually, do I want to really open my door and share my entire sort of risk business and what's going on? So it's an interesting balance, but it certainly worked very well. But when I was a GC, and I embraced bringing in the very small law firms that I was working with, because I've never had an excessive legal budget to spend. I've focused on using my money more likely building my in-house team, and then only using external on either discrete matters or very specific sector areas. So when I was embracing those external law firms, it worked really, really well. And it was a speed of instruction. And actually spotted Christopher Morgan's made the point that value is feeling that you're not always on the clock. It felt like that. I felt like they were there and they were with me. And so obviously now moving into Radius, it's something that Ian and I both are kind of big champions of, as is Sandra, in providing that extra by just being there. And it works in our favor because we actually get better output of what we're delivering for them.
That all makes perfect sense. So we're going to talk some more about the information side of things in just a minute. But before we do, I'd just like to move on to our third poll question. So the question is, in which of the following ways does your legal department measure the value provided by your law firms? And you can select as many of those as apply to you. Okay, I think that's pretty much static now. So right at the top, as I say, outcomes and quality of service. So that's brilliant. And if I'm not mistaken, the results from all of these polls will be shared around after the event. So don't worry, you can have a look at those in more detail. So moving on to the final section of the panel discussion today, which is all about extracting the right information to help drive pragmatic decision making in the legal team. And obviously this can be a challenge, getting hold of this right information throughout the panel management process, whether that's from the initial selection of firms or going through to assessing and harnessing greater value from those longer term partnerships. Maria, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay, on this one. And obviously it's important for legal teams to be able to extract the information they need to help them make the decisions, and also to help them to demonstrate to the business the value and the benefit they're getting from their law firm relationships. So could you share with the group what some of the issues or challenges are that you've seen around actually getting hold of the right information to help with this decision-making process? And have you got any advice or tips you can share?
Yeah, I guess I'll take it from the law firm side of things, hence that's kind of my prime position within the panel today. When you're thinking about the information that is needed, and I guess it's that point of early instruction right the way through to the relationship management, that early instruction as a law firm, we go back to the scope conversation. What information is needed to inform the fee structure and the proposal for what work you will do? But there's also then a question about, well, actually, what is it the general counsel needs from us as information about us as a law firm? And I think sometimes it could be quite useful depending on the size of the GC. And I remember being so busy and struggling to be able to engage properly with the law firm, but maybe a kind of briefing document could be quite useful, and one that can be used as standard, that's set out, that says, actually, look, this is our company, this is who we're about, this is what we want, and this is what we're looking for from a law firm. So flipping that around, then that allows me as the law firm provider who's pitching or providing a proposal can anticipate where the cost elements could come in, or where there could be challenges in terms of the advice that maybe the GC has asked about, but I may from experience have encountered something else and I may be able to add something more. So from that initial part of how to engage well, that information I think could be key, both a briefing document or a kind of good initial request for us. When it comes to ongoing relationship management, then it comes into the feedback conversation. Where do you go? And the challenges are always how to have that positive conversation and kind of get the reinforcement as to how well that's done. And when you think about that poll that, you know, everyone's rating outcomes and kind of quality of service at high, well, then that's great. So there's almost a theory that says we're all doing a great job, sit back, there's no issue, there's no need to worry about panel management, it's working well. But clearly there are cracks and it's not that always perfect scenario. So those are my 2 points, I guess.
Okay, that's great. And Will, have you got anything to add to that? Or alternatively, are you seeing different approaches being taken in the marketplace around decision-making processes or the assessment of value?
Sure. So I think to begin with, I completely agree with what Maria said around aligning expectations. I think that's really important around what information is going to be shared. I think that that's a challenge in itself, but I think that really what it then comes down to is how do you drive compliance with those expectations, particularly in larger organizations. The risk is that those very sort of marvelous documents that a lot of work went into sort of gather dust a little, because unless they're consistently applied across all of your panel firms, they become less and less valuable, and that's something that we help with, but it is a very challenging issue. And I think in terms of sort of trends at the moment in terms of information sharing, perhaps partly driven by the pandemic, but I think that there's a big piece here, and we're all here obviously to talk to each other and to share ideas. I think there's an increasing appetite to try and leverage the experience of others. So I think gone are the days where we would be complacent around the deals that we've struck with the law firms, what those panel arrangements look like. I've got the best in class deal that this firm can ever give me. we really need to be connecting with our peers and networking in this way a lot more to understand where value really lies in the market. We find, for example, that clients who are high priority businesses for a given law firm will be paying sometimes 40% less, so we're told, than low priority clients for that firm. So it's very difficult to gauge that sort of thing, even with good sharing of information. And I think, a use case that comes up a lot for our platform is, what do I do when I'm going into a new market where I don't know anybody? My business is going in there. I need to understand who the best corporate, law firm is. At the moment, it's either plucking that dusty directory off the shelf, which is, dare I say, a bit of a vanity exercise some of the time, or calling up the phone to a friend or a law firm that you trust and know well and asking for a recommendation, which is hugely valuable, but has blind spots and is difficult to scale in a way that really provides objectivity. I think bringing together that sort of network experience is going to be really important when it comes to making better decisions.
Brilliant. And just quickly, do you think the importance of, or the influence, should I say, of peer-to-peer recommendations, which we know a lot of people do rely on, has increased or decreased over the past year or so with COVID?
I think it's increased for sure. I don't know whether that's because people are working remotely and are therefore, more inclined to pick up the phone or to email someone. I think that it comes back to this question of value. So wanting to really stress test and kick the tires on what we're getting out of our law firm relationships by asking a peer. But as I said, I think there's also a perception that in itself is also limited. And is there a better way to bring together that experience and learn from it?
Brilliant, thank you. And Toby, just coming to you now, do you have any comments on anything Maria or Will have said? And also, would you be able to share with the group your approaches that you take when you're assessing new or retained law firms?
I think, to Will's point just at the end there, we're probably more networked and connected now than maybe we were even pre-pandemic, partly because of these sorts of forums have popped up and are more, prevalent than they ever were, I think. And it's actually easier to join one of these and traipse down to a bar to chat to people at 7 p.m. when you've got lots to do or you've got to get home, whatever it might be. So the peer-to-peer networking and the kind of recommendation stuff is super important, because we all do it. And I will always put, perhaps I shouldn't, but I do put a lot of emphasis on recommendations from people I know well and trust, than a pack of credentials that perhaps you could probably send to a bunch of clients and maybe not differentiate between the clients we're sending them to. So that's that point, I think. And then to Maria's point, we do exactly what you say, Maria. We send out a kind of almost like a reverse set of credentials. This is who we are. This is what we want. Because it shortcuts the conversation for one thing. Why make it more difficult for firms to meet your expectations? It's not a test. That's not the test. It's then delivering on them when you say you can do it, I think is the key. So we do that when we talk about ourselves. Great. So that helps a lot. And so to your question, Emma, so that's partly what we do. We're very transparent with the few firms we use. We want them to know all about our business and our values, so it's not a surprise. And as I said at the beginning of the call, we put a lot of emphasis on human values in delivery of legal service, right? Because we believe as an organization that's important. We're completely flat internally. We don't really use hierarchies and titles and all that sort of thing. And we work in quite an unconventional way. So that's kind of important for our firms to recognize and to sort of embrace if they can. So yeah, it's when we send out those packs, as a standardized approach when we do look for new firms, and we try to be consistent. Inevitably, there's always this inconsistencies in the way we treat firms, but we do try, because that helps to standardize. And I'm sure Will's got some clever technology that can probably make it even better for us. But that's sort of how we approach it.
So you standardize the process up front by sending your information pack out. When it comes to measuring your existing firms or a bit further down in the relationship, do you apply the same approach from a measurement of performance and value perspective?
We could be better. We do. We have the sort of set cycles of feedback, but I think actually we could be much better. And naturally, with firms that you do get on better with and the individuals that provide the advice, you do get that more informal loop building up. And we have and that deepens relationships naturally, because we're all humans at the end of the day, I guess, and then that just happens naturally. So we do need to metricate it better and probably be a bit more scientific for sure. But when you're in the thick of it and you've got a lot to do, as Maria said, and you're too busy to think, sometimes it's easier just to rely on those personal connections that develop through good advice and that proactivity. And it's better for me when a firm comes and says, right, how do we get on? What's next? Where are we going? What do you need help from us? On next, that actually is better for us than us picking up the phone and saying, can we have that meeting, or can we have that review session you promised us?
So that's what we're all striving for then, that better relationship management really, and those closer ties with our law firms. I'm very conscious of time and that we need to move on to some Q&As in a moment. So what I've taken from that really is, greater predictability, cost certainty and transparency will continue to be key for legal teams, so they know what they're paying for and that they're getting value for money. To avoid that paying invoices without querying the level of service you've got if you're not happy with it, because it just feeds a cycle of continuous work in that way. Trying to find a way to see your firms as partners rather than just a supplier to further develop those relationships. Value is of course subjective. Business by business have different ideas of what value is, but encouraging those law firms up front to take a more proactive approach to how they serve you, and being clear with them about what it is you're looking and to Maria's point, do you just want that academic objective advice, or are you really looking for them to put that practical overlay? Be clear with them up front. And also on the information extraction point, it's all about trying to align expectations and make sure everyone's clear on what information they need. And that consistency of perhaps doing a bit of work up front to set out what you're looking for to save a bit of time and hopefully benefit things moving down the line. So loads and loads of really, really great points and information there, and subjects that we could talk about for much longer than we've got now. Just to close, before we jump to Q&A, have you got one top tip, each of you, on if you could just choose one thing on how to get the most value from your law firm relationships, what would it be? One tip. Will, I'm going to come to you first. The other two, you've got a second to think. Sorry, Will.
Doesn't seem fair. I think find a way to communicate better with your law firms. I think that's what it all boils down to, this whole transparency, information sharing piece. I think there are ways we can all raise our game on that front. And I think that as buyers of legal services, it's on us to drive that agenda. Brilliant.
Thank you. Maria?
Okay, probably a little bit of an extension of what I've been saying throughout the session. Let your external team in, share with them the challenges you've got or the concerns that you have, so that you can allow them to help provide the solution rather than feel like they maybe don't have the full information. So maybe bring them to meetings, or actually just spend that time in a relationship building point of view to just share some of your challenges. Particularly at GC level, you'll find some quite senior people in the law firm, myself included, who have been in your seat sometimes. And so actually we might be able to share some of that experience as much as the actual legal context.
Thank you. And finally, Toby?
I would say, from personal experience, invest the time internally first to work out your own values before you then go out and ask firms to live up to the values that you're going to put out there. So it's a really useful exercise to kind of hold the mirror up actually and see what it is you really want from your advice, rather than just the usual assumptions that I talked about at the beginning.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That was a really, as I say, interesting and interactive session.